The new MacBook Pros have finally landed, and boy are they impressive. Apple just announced their new 14-inch and 16-inch MacBooks with brand new chips scaled off the wildly successful M1 design from last year. Apple isn't messing around with this refresh, and if you ask me, it looks like this is the beginning of an era of Apple dominance in the Pro laptop space. Let's talk about it. This is Clembo from ZenTechLife, where we love all things to do with lifestyle tech and gadgets. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome! Before I get started though, there are timestamps and chapter markers below, so if you want to skip ahead, feel free to do so. Otherwise, grab a drink, sit back, and let's get into it. In traditional Apple fashion, the announcement started off fairly mild with new HomePod mini colours, a new lower tier Apple Music subscription plan, and Gen 3 of their highly successful AirPods, which follow after the design aesthetic of the AirPods Pro, minus the soft ear tips and noise cancelling. A nice warm-up, you might say, before they, as promised, unleashed the details of their sensational new MacBook Pro lineup. And simply put, wow. Just wow. It was no secret that everyone and their aunt was expecting Apple to announce a new chip, and all bets were placed on it being called the M1X. But nobody predicted that they'd announce two new chips in the event, the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. What's the difference? The M1 Pro takes everything that last year's M1 chip did well and basically doubles the performance. And if that's not enough power for you, as the name suggests, Apple dialed up the power to max with the M1 Max, which essentially doubles the performance again from the M1 Pro. Okay, so maybe I'm lying a little bit about that last statement, as the M1 Pro and M1X do share some important similarities. Namely, both of them have the same CPU core count, with 8 high performance to crush through intense tasks and 2 high efficiency cores for low power activities, bringing it to a total of 10 cores. The main difference between the two chips actually lies in the GPU core count, with the M1 Pro capping out at 16 cores, whereas the M1 Max can be configured all the way up to 32 GPU cores, which is absolutely insane as it's quadrupled the GPU power from last year's M1 chip. If Apple's fancy graphs are anything to believe, the M1 Max could offer graphics performance somewhere between the RTX 3070 and 3080, but with much lower power needs. I'll be honest, I'm definitely living with some buyer's remorse after I picked up the last Intel-fitted MacBook Pro in mid-2020. I was simply not expecting Apple's M1 chip to be so industry disrupting and offer so much performance in such a little package. Don't get me wrong, this 13-inch Intel MacBook is what I started my channel with, and it's performed fairly well. But I'd be lying if I said there haven't been a few lockups, slowdowns, and absolutely shocking battery life. That last point is probably the most noticeable drawback on a day-to-day basis. There have been many days where I've needed to charge my MacBook in the afternoon because it had dropped to less than 30% battery despite starting the day at 100%. So, with Apple claiming up to 11 hours of use on the 14-inch and 14 hours of use on the 16-inch, I can't wait to not worry about topping up the battery in the middle of the day ever again. Suffice to say, today's Intel chips simply can't keep up with the performance and efficiency of Apple's silicon, and frankly, if Intel was concerned by last year's M1 announcement, they're probably shaking in fear with these new monstrous chips that are now in town. Along with the new M1 silicon chips, there is of course a new chassis and return of the ports. With the departure of Johnny Ive in late 2019, it seems the design team of Apple has taken a turn towards function over form. The new 14-inch and 16-inch MacBooks are both slightly thicker, heavier, and feature less tapered edges, more akin to the 2012 design. It seems they finally realised that thinner is not always better, especially if it means sacrificing the things that professional users need. And so after a long hiatus, the HDMI port, SD card reader and MagSafe makes a welcome return to the MacBook Pro. MagSafe offers an alternative charging method that minimizes the risk of the MacBook flying off your table from any accidental yanks of the power cable. It's also the only way to quick charge the Mac, which promises 50% battery charge in just 30 minutes, an absolutely astounding feat considering how large the battery is in the 16-inch model. As a teacher, I've lost count of the number of times I've walked into a classroom and wanted to connect my MacBook to the screen, only to realize I'd left my dongle behind. HDMI is the standard video connection for most workplaces, and I'm so very happy to see Apple bring it back to the MacBook. It appears though Apple didn't opt for HDMI 2.1, which is the standard to output 4K content at 120Hz, but presumably they came across some limitations as they needed to allow enough I/O bandwidth for the other ports to function properly. But perhaps that's something they'll figure out for next year's refresh. So what else is new? Well, as they say, out with the old and in with the new. Say goodbye to the TouchBar, which was one of the most polarizing things introduced by Apple in recent years. Their dream of replacing the function keys with something more dynamic and productive was admirable and good in theory, but ultimately did the opposite, leaving many professionals crying for a return to traditional function keys. And Apple has finally listened. The function row is now back and has full-size keycaps too, along with a new black keyboard deck, which is a neat little design touch. Another major upgrade is the new MiniLED Liquid Retina XDR display. This display features even thinner bezels all the way around. This new display also promises the same deep contrast ratio, color accuracy and brightness as Apple's crazy expensive Pro XDR displays, and having never seen one of those in person before, I'm very excited to experience this screen for the first time. Additionally, it features Pro Motion, so the screen can now adapt its refresh rate to match what is being displayed. This should offer smoother viewing experiences whilst also improving battery life when working on more static tasks. However, with one polarizing thing removed, Apple is of course introducing a new thing for people to moan about: the notch in the display. Personally, I'm not that offended by it, and I like that it blends in with the new menu bar, which typically takes up space anyway, so I don't see it as any loss of screen estate. But it seems there are some strong opinions about that notch. I'll agree that it seems like a missed opportunity that Apple didn't also include Face ID, since they have the notch there anyway, but at least they improved the FaceTime camera to 1080p whilst also giving it a larger sensor and wider aperture, all of which should help provide better image quality during video calls. Considering all the things Apple did right, I suppose they had to leave something back for next year's refresh. So although there isn't Face ID, I'm still feeling fairly positive about the new MacBooks and what Apple has done with them. All of this of course comes with a price, and for some that price might be a bit dizzying. For others it's not terrible, considering the potential performance increase that's being advertised. As always, Apple offers various configurations on their website, allowing you to customize individual elements to meet your needs. Despite these new machines being released just today, if you're simply doing office tasks such as word processing, web browsing, or even just conference calls, then last year's M1 Macs are still a fine option. Especially that MacBook Air, which is incredible value for money. If you do dabble in a bit of video editing or some kind of creative output though, then the M1 Pro is a notable upgrade and should comfortably manage most projects you throw at it. So what about the M1 Max? What's that for and who is it for? Well, anyone who needs ultimate performance, especially graphically, as it's the only chip that offers up to 32 GPU cores. How about gamers? Well, I wouldn't recommend a Mac if your primary use is to game on it. But, well, who knows? With this much potential performance now, maybe some developers will start taking notice and look into porting their games to run natively on Mac. Personally, there was no question that I was going to upgrade to the new MacBook. As I said earlier, in hindsight, the mid-2020 Intel MacBook was a bad purchase, especially after seeing the incredible performance that last year's M1 MacBooks offered. But nobody expected Apple to design such an incredible chip. Anyway, I've been eagerly awaiting the refresh of the much loved 16-inch MacBook Pro, and I'm so glad I waited. I don't typically replace my MacBook so quickly, and I've only had this one for just over a year, which is not much time at all, but even Apple's website compares the new MacBooks with my old Intel configuration, and when I saw the performance metrics, I simply couldn't ignore the temptation to upgrade. 13 times faster rendering speed in Final Cut Pro? Yes, please. Tuesday can't come soon enough, and you bet I'll be doing some side-by-side comparisons to see if Apple's marketing material really lives up to its claims. That's all from me, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear your thoughts about Apple's newest MacBooks, and if there's something specific you'd like me to test, leave a comment below and I'll try my best to look into it. If you liked my content, I'd really appreciate you hitting that thumbs up button, and if you want to see more content from me, then consider pressing that subscribe button too. Be well, stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next one.